Hello and welcome. This is video number 7 in a 13-part series about World War II. And in this video, we're going to take a look at the U.S. decision to officially enter World War II, and we'll just take a look at what that looked like for the United States to finally get involved in an official capacity. Let's get started. Now, just like with World War I, declaring war did not mean that we were then instantly ready to be involved with what was happening. It would take some time to build up our forces, train soldiers. It would be a little while before we would really be ready to go. But given all of that, we did get going pretty fast. So this last little part here is just to talk about the impact of being in the war. Much like with World War I, this was a total war effort. Everybody was involved with participating in the war effort in some way. It didn't matter if you were a man or a woman, if you were old or young. Everybody was going to be participating in some capacity. When it came to production, we had really high production capacity. A lot of the facilities that we had that normally made consumer goods ended up being switched over to producing materials for the war effort. By near the end of the war, there were some 18 million people that were working in war-related jobs just at home. There were many more that were serving as soldiers and actively serving in the military. So it ended up being something where anybody who was an able-bodied working-age person was probably involved in some capacity, again, either as a soldier or working in some way at home. So one of the things that did go away that had been around for some time, going back to the early 1930s, was unemployment. It was kind of hard to be unemployed at this point. Unemployment basically means you're actively looking for work for a period of time but can't find any. At this point in time, though, just about everybody who could possibly work was needed. And so anybody who was wanting to do work had work to do. Now, again, much like with World War I, there was a lot of sacrifice that everybody had to be involved with. And this was true in America. This was true in any of the countries that were actively involved with World War II. I just put a couple of examples up on the screen. A lot of rationing of goods. A lot of the resources that we had were geared to work directly for the war effort and be sent to soldiers. So, example, food was sent to soldiers. And of course, you needed lots of materials for bullets and guns and tanks and planes and all the different things. And so a lot of the normal everyday things that you might expect either became unavailable for a time or at least were in shorter supply. So again, a lot of rationing of goods. And then it put up their speed limit at 35 miles per hour. Seems kind of strange, but when you drive a vehicle slower, the wear and tear on your tires goes down. So the rubber on your tires lasts longer. You also use less fuel. And so that just is one tiny example of the extent to which they modified everyday things to try to conserve every little bit of everything that they could. Something else that was also happening was the use of a lot of propaganda. And again, we tend to think of propaganda negatively. Basically, all propaganda is one-sided information that is designed to persuade people for something. And since success in this really required everybody be on board with the war effort, the propaganda was used to try to motivate and encourage people to support the war. And one of the ways that people could respond was by buying war bonds. War is super expensive, and war bonds were a way that people could contribute a small amount of money, basically loaning the government money, and at some later point, the government would pay them back plus an amount of interest. So a war bond, in a sense, was an investment, not only in the war effort in the moment, but also for anybody who bought a war bond and an investment to make a little money on their money sometime later. But lots of different steps were taken to try to make this work. And as far as people coming together as a country, you could see a lot of patriotism. You could certainly note a lot of positive things that came from this. Now, as is always true with war, there are nasty, negative things that happen with war. About the only thing that might be different is exactly what are the nasty, negative things. And in the United States, probably one of the worst things that came from the war effort was related to the way the civil rights of some Americans were handled, in particular Japanese American citizens. With the attack on Pearl Harbor, it created a fear that a lot of people had for an attack in mainland United States by Japan. And because Japanese American people of Japanese descent, looked different than what you might have thought of at the time as the typical American, somebody of European descent, like English descent or French descent or German descent, because there was an ethnic difference, a visible difference that led to a type of racism or a type of fear that led to a decision being made to intern Japanese American citizens. And basically, what that meant is facilities were put together where Japanese American citizens who primarily lived on the west coast of the United States would be basically rounded up and forced to live in these facilities during the war to try to prevent the opportunity of some kind of a, I guess, effort to fight back against the United States. Now, what was particularly bad about this is people were put into these facilities not based on an actual threat, but just the perception of threat. In fact, nobody that was actually put in any of these facilities was ever proven to have been working on behalf of the Japanese government and working against the United States. Now, the topic of the next couple of days is going to be the Holocaust, and I think it is very important to note that though taking Americans of Japanese descent and putting them in these camps during the war, as bad as that was, it was definitely nothing at all to compare to the Holocaust that went on through the Nazis. People who were interned in the camps in America were not denied food. They were not worked to death. They were not systematically killed. It was basically placing them in this facility to wait during the war. Now, again, lots of negatives to that, lots of problems with that, but definitely not the same thing as what happened with the Holocaust and the Nazis. Well, hopefully watching that video was helpful to understand a little bit more about the United States' early involvement with World War II and also some of the decisions that were made when the United States entered the war. Thanks for watching.